My name is Father Kevin Robb. On some days, I'm the Associate Vice President for Mission and Ministry. On other days, the Associate Treasurer of the College. And somewhere in there, I'm also the Coordinator, Director of the Smith Fellowship Program. I welcome all of you this evening to this presentation. When we send Smith Fellows off on their summer trips, part of the deal is, you know, donors will pay for the entire thing, but when they get back to Providence College, they have to tell members of the Providence College community what they experienced. And so we had one presentation this afternoon at 4 here. We have now at 7 and on Saturday at 3 p.m. As part of St. Dominic weekend. So there will be contributors, large contributors to the college coming to that, and what we will try to do is when it's over, wring more money out of them. So there's method to our madness. The Smith Fellowship Program has now been operative for 3 years. A total of 15 Providence College students have received fellowships and have traveled to various places, you know, on the face of the earth, and it's been pretty well spread out. If you go to the new Providence College webpage, Dr. Trudeau is here, and he's taking care of the webpage for poli-sci, and it's driving him nuts. Ours was a little simpler. There is, under Catholic and Dominican on the main page, it will take you to a landing page for the different aspects of mission and ministry, and under the Office of Mission and Ministry is a direct link to the Smith Fellowship Program. It describes the program, has the application packet, and it also has listed the blogs of 13 of our 15 fellows over the last 3 years, the blogs that are still up and running. And you can really get an idea of what each of them experienced by what they put up on the internet for their families and friends. So I would refer you to that page if you want to discover more about what you're going to hear this evening, or discover what other students have experienced. We have 4 presenters this evening. The first is T.J. Mills. TJ traveled to down under to Adelaide, South Australia, and spent 6 weeks working with the Dominican friars of the province of Australia in Blackfriars Priory School, which they sponsor and staff. We then will hear from Nathan Ricci. Nathan, along with Michael Wall, both went to Blackfriars Hall at Oxford University, the permanent private hall that is run by the Dominican Friars of the English province. Nathan, who will speak this evening, worked within the structure of their Las Casas Institute, and he'll describe that. Michael devoted his time to a study of the Blessed John Henry Newman, especially his work, the idea of a university. And Michael will speak on Saturday at 3. 2 of our 4 Kisumu, Kenya fellows will speak this evening, and they'll do it in tandem. Tommy Cody and Katie McCann. They, along with Kevin Brawley and Katie Tripp, spent 5 weeks at Our Lady of Grace School in Kisumu, Kenya, living on the compound of the Dominican Friars of the Priory of St. Martin de Porres, Dominicans of our own province. That's our mission vicariate. So they lived with the Dominicans in the guest house, and they devoted themselves to Our Lady of Grace School. They also had 2 excursions. I figured if I was sending them to Kenya, they should spend a little time enjoying it. So I made them climb Mount Kenya first, and I'm sure they will tell you about that experience. All 4 of them got to the top and cursed me dearly. At the end, they were able to participate in a safari on the Masai Mara Game Preserve. And they came in very close contact, but protected contact, with some rather fierce animals. Anyway, I invite TJ to come up and begin his presentation. There are refreshments in the back, soda, water, chips, and cookies. Just take anything you want. So again, thank you for coming. Okay?
Okay. Okay. Is this good? Okay. So, hi, my name is TJ, and this summer I went to Adelaide, Australia, and I spent 6 weeks there working at a primary and secondary school. And the title of my presentation kind of explains everything that I did: kids, koalas, and kangaroos. So I have three of my favorite pictures of each of those things of working with the second graders at the school, holding a koala, and feeding a kangaroo. So those are all some highlights of my trip, and kind of in my mind just define it for me. Um, so when I first heard about Smith Fellowship, I knew it was something I really wanted to do, but I had no idea where I was going to go or what I was going to do. And so spent a few weeks searching around online trying to find somewhere. And eventually I got in touch with Blackfriars in Adelaide. And I had never even heard of Adelaide before, but they said that they would have me, and so I figured, why not try it? And as soon as I realized that I was going to Australia, I was like, I really want to see a koala, because I've always been obsessed with them. And a couple weeks before I went to Australia, I was being interviewed by a woman in the publications department, and she said, "What do you hope to bring back from your experience?" And I was as honest as I could, and I said, "A koala." And so now it's 3 months later, and I have my koala. So I bought him the day that I went to hold the koala in Adelaide, and I didn't actually get to see those ones there, but I just love that picture. And so I'll keep him right here. So yeah, the trip really was the trip of a lifetime for me, and I brought back so much more than a koala, and I hope that in the next few minutes I can kind of show you what I did and where I've been since then, and just why this really was such a great opportunity for me. So if you look here, that's the map of Australia. You can see Adelaide is kind of in the south-central part of the country. So only one person that I talked to before I left had ever even heard of the city. So it's the capital of South Australia. It's got a population of about 1 million people. And so it's kind of pretty spread out city. So it's a little bigger than Providence, but it was a really nice place. And Blackfriars was located just north of the city. And so Blackfriars is a school run by the Dominicans. And they only have about 4 or 5 friars working at the school now. And so I didn't do a whole lot of one-on-one work with them, but they were definitely a big presence at the school. And the school has a population of about 1,000 students, anywhere from kindergarten through 12th grade. So it was a really wide range, and I got the chance to work with all the different age groups at the school. So when I got there, I had been working for the couple months before I left and figuring out what to do. And so I had been in touch with the chaplain at the school, and he was saying, like, "Oh, you'll come work in my department and run retreats and masses and teach religious ed classes." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds great." And then I got there, and the chaplain was not even at the school. He was working somewhere else in the city for the first, I think, 2 or 3 weeks that I would be there. And so the principal pretty much told me we don't know what to do with you, so what do you want to do? And so I figured that I would just try to get a good feel of the school and work all over it. And it really worked out for the best of all the experience that I got to have there. So I started off working in their learning enrichment office, which was my host family. The father worked in that office, and so I kind of followed him in on the first day and just got stuck there. But it was a really it was a team of 3 teachers that worked in there and provided kids with special needs the help that they needed. And it was a really great office to work with. And from there, I went and did work in the primary school. And that's a picture of me with the 4th graders, or the year 4s as they call them. So I kind of describe myself as an unofficial student teacher. But whenever I was in the class, I'd be like part teacher, part distraction. The kids were always full of questions about America, and just they wanted to have fun, and I was more than happy to go along with that. And so, in addition to that, I worked with some of the older kids too in the years 10, 11, and 12 in religion and philosophy classes. So that wasn't nearly as much fun as working with the younger kids, but it was definitely really interesting work to do too. So this year is working in the learning enrichment office. So every morning they would have something called reading group, where all the kids that needed a little extra help in their reading would come and go. They would just come in every morning and read through some pretty simple books and try to help explain words to them. And they were a really great group of kids, so I got to know them really well, and we definitely had a lot of fun together. It was always kind of tough funny, the way they would write words and their Australian accents, they would pronounce everything differently. And so they would write things down the way that they pronounced them. And so like the word world would be W-E-L-D. And so I would look at it, I have no idea what they were writing. And they would have to explain to me what they were saying, and I'd try and figure out the right way to do it. Something else I did with the Learning Enrichment Office was something called Games Club. 3 days a week, they would have kids come in during lunch, and they can just go and play games, and it's just something different to do during the lunch period. And so I would normally go and spend my lunchtime in there. So Danny, she was one of the women I worked with in the office, was joking with me that I was in there playing, I think we were playing Jenga one day. And she said, "Oh, you'll go back to your college and say, look what I did with my fellowship. I learned how to play games." And that kind of is what I did learn to do. But we had a lot of fun with the kids, and we got to know them really well and really learn a lot about Australia and about their lives. And they always wanted to hear anything I would tell them about my life and about what life is like here in America. In the primary school, I worked with 2nd, 4th, and 5th grade. And so pretty much every day I would be over in the primary school section. And this is with my year 2, 2nd grade kids. So I went in there every afternoon, and I never wanted to leave. So I would go in there right after lunch, and my first couple of days there, we were watching The Lion King. And I was supposed to go to the 7th grade class after that, and I kind of conveniently forgot to go. I would just stay with the younger kids, working with them. But they were always a lot of fun to work with. And the 4th graders, I went with a couple days a week. So this is a little bit of a more serious picture with them. But they were a really fun group, and they had this weird obsession with throwing dodgeballs at each other. So at the end of class every day, they would just start throwing balls at each other. So I would kind of have to duck out of the way when they started doing that. And then the last one, the year 5, they were probably one of my favorite groups to work with. They were a lot more mature than the younger kids, but still really young, just fun to be around. And I was thinking about one day we were working on a modern-day Jesus assignment where they had to draw what they thought Jesus would look like if he came into the world today. And it was crazy to see the kinds of things that they had, like a gangster Jesus, a hippie Jesus, and Jesus riding a scooter. And so it was really interesting to kind of get insight from the little kids and see where they were at. Something else I did with all the younger kids was give them presentations on life in America. And so anything from Chuck E. Cheese to Sour Patch Kids, they were always thrilled to hear about. And I did do actual stuff with some of the older kids too, but I don't have any pictures of that. So that was mostly, I worked with 2 year 10 religion classes, and so I helped teach those classes doing things with the Eucharist and the Reformation. And there are a couple philosophy classes, which were interesting to see how philosophy is taught to 16-year-olds. Towards the end of my fellowship, they weren't exactly doing a whole lot in their class, so I would just leave early and go back to the year 5s and the year 2s. But it was really great experience to get working in all the different areas of the school and to meet the staff and the kids and really just become a part of their community. They were really welcoming people, and they liked having me there, and I loved to be there. And then outside of the school, I lived with Brett and Regan. They were a young couple who lived in the suburbs, and that's their 3-year-old son, Cooper, who would drag me into his playroom every night and have tea parties and play with trains and trucks. And, then on the right is their daughter, Lenny, and she was born 3 days before I left. So it was kind of neat. I got to really be a part of their family and getting ready for the baby, and then going to the hospital and actually getting to hold her right before I went home. So it was a really neat experience to live an everyday Aussie life and just be a part of the family. And then I also did a lot of stuff kind of exploring Adelaide and the surrounding area. There was a really beautiful city to just go wander around and explore. That's a picture kind of looking out from the top of the city out. There's like the downtown area and all the parklands, and then the hills off in the background. And so I spent a lot of afternoons after school going into Rundle Mall and the Central Market and kind of exploring around. And the Adelaide Hills are about 15 minutes outside the city, and I went up there a couple different weekends. And there was one day we were driving home, and there was a big kangaroo crossing sign on the side of the road. And Brett was like, "Oh, keep your eye out, you never know what you'll see." And I looked, and there was a pack of kangaroos hopping down in the valley. And there were 12 of them just right there. So it was really, really neat to see something that you see on TV in real life. And I also, halfway through my time there, I went to Kangaroo Island, which is just off the coast of Adelaide. And it's a really, really neat area. I had a picture of the remarkable rocks, a huge rock formation right on the cliff over the ocean. And then Pennington Bay, which opens out on the Southern Ocean, pretty much all the way to Antarctica. So I had never even been off the Atlantic coast before, so seeing that was definitely something different. And then traveling around in the Adelaide Hills with plenty of wildlife signs, and I made it my goal to get a picture with each of them. So you get the kangaroos, echidna, and 2 koala signs. The last one was in the middle of the freeway. So we kind of had to park our car on the side of the road and run across really fast. But it was definitely worth it to get the picture. But there weren't too many cars coming when we went, so it wasn't that bad. And then these are just some of the pictures around pretty much from my last week at the school. The top left is Danny, Maria, and Leanne, who were 3 of the women I worked with in the Learning Richmond office. And on the right are Tommy and Anton. They were year 2 and year 5 brothers. So I got really close with the 2 of them and did a lot of work with them. The bottom left are Jordan and Brian. They were 2 of the year 8 boys that came to Games Club every day. So they were always full of questions and never wanted to stop talking. On the right is Gregor. He was a French student, and he was in Adelaide for 3 months, and they appointed me to be like his mentor for his time there. And so we had a year 10 mentor day where I went and I kind of just like a male mentor for him, which was really neat. So I got to know him really well and learn a little bit about France while I was in Australia. And in the middle is Christian. He was a year 4 boy from reading group. And on my next slide, I have something to kind of keep him in mind. But he was always really fun to work with, and he was not at all happy when I had to leave. So looking back by the end of my time there, it's hard to believe that it was already time to go. And it was funny because I was going through my blog, and I looked back at my first post and my last post. And my very first one was the day before I left for Australia. And I said, it's hard to believe that just 24 hours from now, I will be boarding the plane at Logan Airport. It will begin my 6-week journey to the land down under. And 6 weeks later, I was sitting at my home in Adelaide saying, it's hard to believe that in just 12 hours, I'll be on a plane that'll take me home. And then, so it was kind of funny that I couldn't believe I was leaving to Adelaide, and I couldn't believe I was leaving to come back home afterwards. So my time there it really flew by, and it was just something else that I did not want to leave behind. And now, it's my blog post from a couple days ago is, I can hardly believe it's been almost 3 months now since I left Adelaide. And that kind of is the theme of my whole trip, that it's hard to believe that it actually happened, but it's hard to imagine my life right now without it, where I learned so much from my trip and the people I met, the things I got to do. It was great to get the teaching experience, to travel to the other side of the world and really find a home for myself there and make a name for myself somewhere in a completely different environment. So I guess, where am I now is, I wish that I was in Adelaide right now, which is still kind of weird to think that I want to go back there, which I never left the country before I went there, and now I can't wait to go back. And then that's an email I got from Christian, who was on the last slide. I got this, I was in Los Angeles. I hadn't even gotten on the plane yet to come back to Boston. And it was, TJ, we were missing you at Adelaide. Please come back one day. He's full of different smiley faces and emoticons. Like, he was not happy I left, and he was really excited to send that email to me. So I was looking back at another thing in my post. During my first week here, Christian asked me if I would want to stay in Adelaide and at Blackfriars long term. I told him, nah, I don't think so. 5 weeks later, I have somebody else ask me almost every day, and my response is always, I wish I could. And it was really, just truly, really a life-changing experience that I couldn't imagine coming here as a junior without having done that, and to really set the stage for my next 2 years here and what I want to do after I graduate. So it was just such a blessing and a great opportunity to have, and I just could not imagine if I hadn't done it. So that pretty much sums up my trip and everything I've gained from it. So, questions? Or, okay, so thank you.
This good? That's better. So, Father Rob, if I slip into a British accent, feel free to take the microphone away from me. Okay. Before I begin my presentation this evening, I'd just like to take the chance to formally thank Father Kevin Robb, Father Joseph Guido, and all the members of the Father Smith Fellowship Committee for their support this year, for their generosity, and especially to the donors, without whom none of this would be possible. So thank you, Father Rob, Father Pavarnik, thank you, and to all those who were involved, a special thanks. This evening, I hope to give you all a small taste of my travels this summer to England and to Europe, particularly at the University of Oxford and Blackfriars Hall, where I studied. But before I go into what I actually did, and of course this is the question that everyone wants to know, what did you do in Oxford? And my parents, the moment I got off the plane, my mother came up to me and she goes, "Did you see Will and Kate?" And I said, "No, I didn't see Will and Kate. I was studying at Oxford." But yeah, so that was sort of the big question of the year. But what I'm going to do tonight is start off by describing the more theoretical aspects of what I did in England, because my project, like Michael Wall, who also studied in Oxford, was a study-based project. So a lot of what we have to begin with is theoretical, and then I'll show you some pictures of what I actually did and all the fun stuff that came later. Just over 2 years ago, I began hearing about these so-called Father Smith fellowships for study and service abroad, wondering what they were about. And when I learned more about them, the opportunity immediately stuck out to me. The chance to study in a foreign country, to travel throughout Europe, to study something I was really passionate about, and to delve into a culture that I was really alien to. Really good selling points for sure. But what I was primarily concerned with were questions I wanted answered. Questions that I had thought of from the very beginning of my time here at Providence College. And I knew that this experience was going to help me answer those questions. Being a philosophy major, I like to ask a lot of questions. And this trip really helped to, in a way, find some answers. So my chief question was this, and those of you who know me know that I'm a political science and a philosophy major, so I always trying to find some combination of the two. So my main question is, what is the role of faith in public life? Indeed, where do politics and religion intersect, if at all? Are faith and public life, religion and politics complementary, or are they contradictory? And these questions became my inner mantra for the first 6 weeks. Now, these questions you've probably heard before, either in civ class or in a poli-sci class or philosophy class. They're not really new. In fact, the ancients and medievals often considered them rather thoroughly. Aristotle thought that politics was the highest of the practical sciences, which also acted as a means to contemplating the good, what he associated with the divine. Nor is the question antiquated. The moderns were also fans of considering it, although definitely to a different degree. Thomas Hobbes actually thought religion could be used to manipulate society, while Voltaire famously declared society needed to eradicate the disgrace that was the Catholic Church. And if any of you have watched a contemporary political debate recently, Rick Perry comes to mind for me, you know that politics and religion have some complementarity in today's world. So I began delving more into these very broad questions with a hint of wisdom I learned from Father Joseph Torch's class. I know some of you have had Father Torch before. And Father Torch told us that there's a dictum by St. Anselm of Canterbury, namely, fides quaerens intellectum, or faith-seeking understanding. So my goal was really to find a link between what I call the sacred and the secular, coming to a better understanding of my faith in the context of public and thus rational life. But of course, like any young, naive philosophy student, these questions are way too broad. And when I met with Father Rob, he said, Nathan, you need to narrow it down. So we talked about different things I could actually study that would be useful. And what we came up with was what sociologists are calling secularization. And this is what is referred to as the social transformation of society from close identification with religious values to a society with no religious values at all. So faith and politics, we want to be complementary, and that's really the paradigm. But this idea of secularization says that in today's world, there is no complementarity. The secular world has no place for religious convictions. And that's really a scary thought when you think about it. But to some, the process of secularization is a very good thing. After all, already in the 18th century, the Enlightenment Fathers very much wanted to eradicate religion in all of public life. Nietzsche prophesied famously that God is dead in the 19th century. And there are many today, especially in elitist political circles, who would find any mention of God, of faith, of religious values to be inimical to the political process as such. Religion, they say, is a private matter. It's what I believe. It needs not be a part of the public sphere. But other people disagree, myself being one of them. Blatant secularism, which seeks to rid religion of any public importance whatsoever, is not so good. In a recent speech on his trip to United Kingdom, our Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, warned the people of England of an aggressive secularism. This is the type of secularism which, under the mantras of pluralism and freedom, discriminates against any religious perspective in politics, culture, and political life. These questions are very important, and I found them very challenging to answer. Now, you're probably already bored with all that mumbo-jumbo, so let's get to the good stuff. What did I do while I was abroad? And if you're like my mom and my dad, you really want to see pictures and not my face staring at you the whole time. So we'll get to this. Okay, so Blackfriars. Now, TJ said that he went to Blackfriars. It was a different kind of Blackfriars, but again run by the Dominican fathers. And here at Blackfriars, Michael and I did an individualized program of study. So while Michael was studying Cardinal Newman, I was studying secularization, faith and public life, religion and politics broadly. And just like PC is run by the friars of the province of St. Joseph, as Father Rob mentioned at the beginning, Blackfriars is run by the friars of the English province. And it serves two purposes, really. The first one is to train Dominicans in their studium to be priests. So they'll do pontifical degrees in theology and other sorts of things. But it's also a private permanent hall at the University of Oxford. So there are many students here not studying theology, not studying philosophy, who are members of the broader University of Oxford. And there's a picture of just the grounds. It's just really great medieval architecture. Although I think this is an impression. This was built in the 1920s, I think. Now here's the library. Now, my hope was to spend a lot of time here, but as Michael will tell you, I probably could have spent more time here. But essentially, this is where all of that theoretical stuff I was talking about got done, so to speak. And part of the educational system at Oxford is a very individualized system of education. So here at PC, you're normally in big classes. Western Civ freshman year, you have 50, 60 kids in a class, or maybe even 100 actually. But at Oxford, it's one-on-one. So each pupil will meet with his professor, given an individual class. So for instance, I did a tutorial, as they call it, on the sociology of religion with Dr. Kieran Flanagan. And every week we would discuss different readings that he had me do, and he would ask me questions and I would respond. And it was a really great way to learn a very particular system of what I was studying. Now, and there's the Blackfriars Chapel, which is a beautiful chapel. And we had evening prayer services there, mass there daily. It's one of the chapels which is few in Oxford to bring in a lot of light. England isn't a very light place. It's often a very dark and dimsy place, but this chapel is actually quite beautiful. Now, this is a little blurry, but the first thing I want to kind of segue into is the experiences, the actual events and conferences that I went to during my time abroad. So I had my tutorials with Dr. Kieran Flanagan. We studied sociology of religion, secularization, all of that good stuff. But what I really began to learn was, it was these events, going to these lectures, meeting these people, which for me was one of the greatest learning experiences, and I'm sure Michael would say the same thing too. This one was the annual John Henry Newman lecture on faith and public life. So go figure, we're in Oxford, I'm studying this, and here we go, having this great lecture. And the man standing there is Peter Cardinal Turkson, who is the Pope's basically right-hand man when it comes to social justice. He is the president of the Pontifical Council for Social Justice, and some say, I don't know much of the ecclesiastical gossip, but some say that he might be Pope one day if there ever was an African Pope. So, Michael, we can say that we might have met the Pope. Now, Cardinal Turkson focused in his talk on the role of religion in public life and the synthesis of faith and reason as complementary, not contradictory. And in his talk, the Cardinal said, "Churches and religious communities cannot be estranged or silenced in public debates. They have every right, especially in a so-called pluralistic society, to contribute to the well-being of the polity. And it is that religious voice which often affects positive change in public life, not simply in the private life of believers." So we can see religion as being a private thing. Kierkegaard, for instance, that we learned in Civ. Religion is about the subjective, personal relationship with God. Or we can see religion as a communal thing, a public thing. And the Cardinal is saying is that we ought not to relegate religion or faith to the private sphere. We ought to bring it into the public sphere. We ought to dialogue as religious people, as persons of faith, with secular society. And of course, like all things in Oxford, there's wine and cheese. And here are Michael and I and Kate Paquette, who is a senior here, and her boyfriend Brogan, chatting it up with the Cardinal. So that was a great event. Okay, the next thing, another lecture, go figure, on faith and public life. So it was apparently the time to study this in England. Now this is a conference that I went to in London that was organized by the different religious faiths in England. So if you can see over here, the man in the front is a Hindu. The two men, the one next to him and the man at the end, are both Anglicans, and the man in the middle with sort of the black hat on is actually a Greek Orthodox archbishop. And basically, a bunch of religious leaders came to this conference to discuss these perennial issues. What is the role of faith in public life? How are we to deal with an increasingly secularized society, especially in the United Kingdom? And what can we bring to bear to our churches when we go home and when we preach to our people? And it was just a fantastic conference. It really was. We engaged in a lot of good discussion during it. And one thing that I came to learn here is that there is a distinct difference between secularity, that is, a state being secular or neutral, and secularization or secularism, which means that faith and a religious perspective is often relegated to the private sphere and taken out of the public sphere. So the United States is a secular state. The Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause guarantee that there will be no state religion. In the United Kingdom, it's a little bit different. It's a monarchy, and Her Majesty the Queen is both the head of state and the head of church. In fact, in the United Kingdom, Anglican archbishops and bishops have a voting right in Parliament, which I find fascinating. And in fact, there was an Oxford article while we were there that was ranting against that and wanted to boot the bishops out of Parliament. I don't know if that's a good idea. But the fact remains that totally different political systems in that respect. And if I'm wrong, the political scientists will definitely correct me. But it's interesting also to note that while we say that the United States is a neutral state, is secular, and the United Kingdom has that religious dimension worked into its sort of very way of being, the UK is often considered a more secularized state, and the United States a more religious state. And it's very ironic to think that way, but it is indeed true. Religion is on the rise in some areas in the United States, and in the UK, religion is often relegated to either the private sphere or to no sphere at all. So you see the New Atheists movement rising. You see movements in England where politicians, for instance, Tony Blair, who was one of the former prime ministers of Great Britain, he wanted to bring a religious perspective to his government, and he was criticized very heavily for doing that. So it's an interesting dynamic there. This is the Parliament, which you're probably all aware of. We didn't actually go to visit it, but did take a nice snapshot of it. And this is the United Kingdom Conference of Catholic Bishops, and I was actually able to meet with a woman there who is very interested in interreligious dialogue. So it was nice to see sort of the different connections across the pond. Now this is a picture of Blessed Franz Jägerstätter. And this right here, you might have remembered from one of my pictures before, is the Blackfriars Chapel. And this really emphasizes the spiritual dimension of what I was doing, because this service was in honor of a man, namely Blessed Franz Jägerstätter, who basically gave up his life, was martyred for the faith in the face of Nazi evil. So in the 20th century, when Nazism, the Nazi party, was basically going right into Austria and the Anschluss, many men were required to enlist in the army, and Franz Jägerstätter conscientiously objected and was killed. And so he's often recognized as a great martyr for peace and a great martyr for justice. Now, Franz Jägerstätter had a full family, a wife and kids, and he left that, he gave up his life, he wouldn't enlist in the army because he held on to something much more deeper, something that went beyond the dictates of the state. And so what we see here, in a spiritual sense, in a very real way, is that oftentimes religion and politics, faith, public life, the demands of one's conscience and the demands of the state are contradictory to each other. They oppose each other. And this is one instance of that. So he remains a hero of mine and hopefully a hero to all of you as well. Now, I also had the opportunity to travel abroad while I was in Europe. So I went to Strasbourg, France, which is the home and the seat of the European Parliament. So the European Union is first and foremost set in Brussels, but it also has its parliament, or one of its parliaments, in Strasbourg. Now, I've never traveled alone before, and I've never traveled alone not knowing the language. Now, you can go to Italy, and you can try and speak Italian or speak English, and they'll let you go by, or you can go to Germany, and you can speak English, and they'll let you go by. You go to France, learn French. Learn French. That is my advice to you. I was sitting on the train, and this is the channel, so it's going under the water from England to France. And for whatever reason, maybe I'm a friendly guy, I don't know, I was talking to the woman next to me, and we had, a small chat, and I told her I'm getting off at the next stop, nice to meet you, so-so. And then I went to sleep. I did not wake up until she was shaking me and said, "This is your stop." So, advice. If you're going to France, learn French or make friends with a French woman on the train, or else you will not find your way to Strasbourg. So yeah, and it's just it has a very Germanic sense of architecture, and it just really is a great place. Now it's kind of an interesting architecture, but this is the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And I had the opportunity to go here and to meet with representatives of the European People's Party. And for those of you who don't know much about the EU, the European People's Party is a party which represents all the EU countries of a particular ideology. So the European People's Party is very much aligned with the Christian Democrats, that party which you'll see in Germany. So this was one of the more conservative parties and certainly the most religious party that I became aware of within the European Union. And I met with a person, Gabor Torek, who was the advisor to the European People's Party on matters of religious dialogue and cultural affairs. So in the United States, we never really would hear of an advisor for religious matters for a politician. It almost seems to be an anomaly. But here within this party, they actually have positions to sort of encourage a religious, a cultural a way of understanding things. So that was really interesting to see. And it was also interesting to learn that the formation of the European Union wasn't simply an economic formation. Robert Schuman, one of the founding fathers of the EU, was a Christian, a Catholic, and he envisioned a Europe that was unified within these Christian principles. So that was great to see as well. Here is Brussels, where I went right after my trip to Strasbourg, and this is in Belgium. And here in Brussels, I met with Monsignor Piotr Mazowiecki. I don't know if I said that right in Polish, but he is basically the bishop's secretary of the European bishops to the European Union. So the European bishops kind of have their own commission. They call it Comice, and he's the secretary, and he represents the interests of the bishops to the European Union. So I met with him, and we discussed a great deal about politics, about faith, and how he brings his religious perspective to the political realm. I also get to travel a little bit through Belgium, and this is Bruges, which is a beautiful medieval city just full of canals and waterways, and just a great place to be. This is the highlight of my trip, which is a waffle, and this was in Louvain, and if you've had a Belgian waffle here, you probably think it's good, but you haven't seen anything until you've tasted that thing. It is absolutely heavenly, and I just decided to show a picture because it was one of my favorite parts of the trip, so there it is. Now, when I got back to Oxford, met up with Michael, of course, and my trip to Europe, to the European Union, was over. And we basically had a week or two just to sort of explore Oxford as such. And this is a picture of one of the chapels at Magdalen College, where we heard evening prayer service, which was a beautiful sung choral meditation. And to show you a few more pictures of life in Oxford, the Eagle and Child, where we would have many a meal, where the Inklings used to go to drink beer and discuss philosophical things. C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, great minds. And so we went there for many meals. Fish and chips was very good. And this you might notice from Harry Potter. This is the Divinity School in Oxford. And I don't know what scene is shot here. I think maybe the nursery scene. Leah, is that right? Yeah, Leah's shaking her head. So this is where that was shot. So it's cool to see all these buildings in Oxford being in Harry Potter as well. This is me punting or attempting to punt with one of our friends, Emil. And as you can see, Emil has the other oar because clearly I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. The river goes this way, which means that the boat should be going this way, not this way. But it's great fun, as they would say, great fun. This is actually a Providence College reunion picture. So this was one of our final balls that we had at Blackfriars, and there's Michael sitting over there, Tom Riley, who graduated 2 years ago, Kate Paquette, who's a senior, myself, and Tom Naylor, who's also a senior. So I think Providence had one of the greatest majorities at Blackfriars, which was really great to see. And this is what I'm going to leave you with, which is an ominous photo of Westminster Abbey. And just quickly, when I got home from the trip, I sort of had to ask myself, what am I supposed to get out of this? I had some very broad questions, and I had a lot of questions after that as well. And when I came back, I had some answers, but not a lot. In fact, I left with more questions than I had answers. But there are a few things that I would like to say. If we follow St. Anselm's dictum, fides quorens intellectum, or faith seeking understanding, We can and should bring our faith into the public realm, making it readily available to those who inquire about it, and we shouldn't be afraid to speak God talk, so to speak, in the public square. Making faith solely a private matter, divorcing it from political life, divorcing it from reason, divorcing it from the life of culture and society, runs the risk of abandoning those perennial virtues of religion which enhance the well-being of any society, secular or otherwise. But if at the end of the day we call ourselves Christians, we must also realize the primacy of our faith over any secular society. We must remain in the words of the great English saint Sir Thomas More, "The king is good servant, but God's first." Thank you.
Start. You have to bear with us as well. Katie and I kind of do a dual presentation because we both went. There were also two other Smith Fellows, as Father Rob mentioned before. We went on this Kenya trip, but we're going to be bouncing off one another, so just bear with us. Can you all hear me? Okay. We're going to start with a quick timeline and show you how we went through our trip. We actually did a little bit of traveling within Kenya, and actually outside of Kenya in Europe a little bit on our flight back, but that's something very quick. The four Smith Fellows for Kenya, we spent most of our time in Kisumu, Kenya. Kisumu was located in the north, I think this is the northern part of the country bordering Lake Victoria. That's the third largest city in Kenya, population-wise. And it's actually the location of where most of the political violence occurred in 2008. So it's an area that has gone through a lot because it has a big problem with tribalism. So we got to experience a little bit of that, a little bit of the tribal issues that are coming up today. If you might hear about them in the news and stuff. But most of our experience was with the students. And the students kind of allowed us to have this vision into society in Kenya, into what the Dominicans do in Kenya, and the broader mission. But our first thing, when we arrived in Kenya on June 16th, after a very long flight, connecting through Istanbul, I must hike Mount Kenya, as Father Rob said before, which was very difficult. We did not curse him at the top. We thanked him because it was absolutely beautiful. But on the way up, we might have cursed him a little bit when it was 40 degrees and raining, and I had no other change of clothes. But we'll go through. I was the one responsible for organizing the Mount Kenya hike. Both Katie and I will be talking about the Our Lady of Grace School in Kisumu, Kenya, and then Katie, who did the safari, will be talking about the safari. She was responsible for that, and that was a lot more fun and a little drier, more comfortable. We'll start with Mount Kenya. Mount Kenya, the peak that we climbed, there were 5 peaks. Most of them required technical climbing. This did not require technical climbing, slightly less dangerous. So this is what we went with. But it's 16,000 feet, 4,809 meters. To kind of give you an idea, that's base camp at Mount Everest, about 1,000 feet above base camp at Mount Everest. So we all did get a little bit of altitude sickness. But the way up, the whole trip, interacting with the people, our guides, was just an incredible experience. To kind of start off the trip with each other and work together. We're forced to become very close during the hike up, helping each other on the way through the difficulties. It was a 90-kilometer hike, all told, there and back, I think. There's us at base camp. We started at the gate of Mount Kenya after a very interesting ride in a 10-passenger van in which we went over dirt roads and into potholes and stalled in the middle of a village. Which was very interesting as the car was rocking back and forth. Katie looked back at me with the face that I think it was a little bit of the mantra of the trip was, what did we just get ourselves into? Base camp, we went through 4 different ecosystems, which was really cool on our way up, the rainforest, and then eventually up and we saw a glacier on the equator, which was incredible. I just kind of flipped through some of these pictures on our first day in the morning of the hike. The first day we went through that rainforest and up into the mountains and into the valleys and through the hills and stuff. It was just an incredible hike, forced to really, again, push ourselves to the limit. This was something that I had never done before, hiking this intensely, and we just really challenged me, both mentally and physically.
And just as a perspective, I trained for the half marathon thinking that would be excellent preparation for this hike, and it paled in comparison.
This was the view when we, on the second or the third day, we were coming up to the base camp. This was about halfway through the hike, and we came around, and we were expecting, okay, so we're going to start getting close soon. And he goes, all right, well, we're getting pretty close. Come around, and I see this looming in the distance. And I thought to myself, again, what did I just get myself into? We all kind of looked at each other. It was an incredible experience to be able to see the creation of God and the beauty of Africa, how absolutely beautiful it is and how much it changes the different landscapes. As you go through, just the odd vegetation that we saw on the way up, it was really just baffling.
Well, more than odd, it was very creative and industrious because it only rains for a short period of time on the mountains, and so those plants are formed in a way to collect and store the rainwater for when there is no rain. So I think there is a lot of wonder and awe in that long summit.
This was at the base camp, one of the coldest and most uncomfortable I've ever been in my entire life. Again, it was about 40 degrees, maybe colder, raining. It was a long hike, and we came to this on the top of the mountain, shrouded in mist and clouds. And the next morning, we woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and began our ascent into the summit, which was how long was the hike to the summit again?
It was only about 3 kilometers.
It was only about a 3-kilometer hike that took us about 3 hours. For the majority of the hike up, the incline was about that, I think. I don't think that's exaggerating. So we were sucking air and trying our best to get up, but it took us a very long time. That's our view from the top. This is what we were not cursing Father Rob, but thanking Father Rob and all the donors and everyone who made this possible to allow us to see this. Snow on the equator, a glacier on the top of this mountain, and just an incredible experience of witnessing God's creation. It's an incredible start to our journey, but we're going to get to, this is us and our guides, our crew that dragged us up the mountain for some of it and literally pushed us up at some points. They were an incredible group of people. Our cook, Benson, we felt very bad for him because we never really quite ate his food because we were always very sick, and he thought that his food wasn't good. And we had to explain to him at the end that it was because we were sick and we couldn't eat his food, not because we disliked it. But dealing with it culturally in Kenya, eating is a very big thing as it is all around the world. But if you don't finish your food, means you didn't like it. Whether you're hungry or not hungry, you finish it. So we learned that a little bit the hard way, but we learned it, and everyone was very patient with us along the way. Again, us at the bottom, finally back down. And we're going to start with Our Lady of Grace School. I'm going to hand it over actually to Katie here to explain a little bit about Our Lady of Grace School and Father Tom's Kids. That's where we spent most of our time and working with the nonprofit who funded the students. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge, so Katie's going to do a great job of explaining it.
So it took us quite a few sessions with the director of Father Tom's Kids, which is a sponsorship organization that funds and supports all of the students at Our Lady of Grace School to truly work through this sponsorship dynamic and the fundraising and development aspects of the organization. So we will try to put it as concisely as possible, but things are not as clearly cut in Kenya as they may be in the U.S., which is definitely one of my main lessons. I am a public service and political science major here, so I've had quite a bit of experience working with nonprofits and different institutions doing development work, but this was an entirely different ballgame altogether. Initially, the Father Tom's Kids sponsorship organization was founded in the post-election violence of 2007, so in 2008, they started housing students whose parents had either been killed in election violence or had been separated from their children. And those classes started underneath the mango trees on the Dominican compound. Eventually, it expanded. They were able to take over some property, which I'm sure you'll see some pictures of, and they started working with a school, Our Lady of Grace School, and that became a separate institution under this sponsorship organization. So the school is run separately by a principal of the secondary school and a principal of the primary school, and then there is an administrative staff for the sponsorship organization that works closely with the staff and the faculty of the school, but is a separate entity.
Everyone got it? Okay. There's supposed to be a video. But the video actually is not working on this computer. I used a different program to embed the video, so it wasn't working. But if you want to see these videos and learn more about the school, we'll give you the website with the videos on and everything later. This is the mission statement of Father Tom's Kids, which is the organization, like Katie said, who funds all the students at Our Lady of Grace School, to offer, whoops, that was a typo, for young people to discover their natural dignity, talent, and potential by educating them in a disciplined environment that is challenging and nurturing. These students come from very broken families for the most part. We learned in Kenya one of the biggest distinctions that kind of just told the situation with most of these students was the distinction in between orphans and true orphans. I had never heard that there was a difference between people who did not have parents and for children who had lost that very, very integral part of their childhood and part of life. In Kenya, a true orphan is someone who has absolutely nobody, no grandparents, no family relations, nothing. Generally, they were dropped at an orphanage, either with the Dominicans, or simply with all their whole family has been killed. An orphan is someone whose parents are not alive or with them, but they have grandparents to support them. One of the beauties of the Kenyan culture, and it has its problems, but one of the beauties of it is a family supports each other, a big extended family. It was kind of confusing sometimes because someone says, well, my mom is this person. And then you talk to another student and Jack might say, oh, well, I'm so-and-so's brother, but you find out they're really actually cousins. So this extended family is a huge support system. But that distinction was something that I think really struck all of us, that there had to be a distinction between orphans and true orphans. This is a photo of the school, of the students. It goes from primary, as TJ said, which is ages 5, all the way through. Primary school goes from age 5 or grade 1 to grade 8, which is about 8th grade in our school system. And then there's the secondary school, which is high school, Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, and Form 4, corresponding to freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. But this is the whole school, the upper compound, the first one built. There's the lower compound as well, which was built just over last year. Julie and Patricia, who went the year before us, saw it in construction. We actually got to see it not completed, but there was a temporary structure up and there were classes going on, which was amazing. We were blessed enough to have a student brother with us, brother Dominic from St. Joseph, from the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. He was an extremely great resource for us throughout with our struggles with dealing with the culture, with dealing with the shock of the students' stories, which we'll give a little bit later on. It was not an easy trip. I think all of us can say that. It was an extremely rewarding one. Waking up at 5:30 in the morning and going to Rosary at 6:10 and then Mass at 6:30 every single day. I fell asleep in Mass, confession, once or twice, and I had a couple of girls in the school laugh at me afterwards.
Well, because if the students fell asleep during Mass, they would have to stand up at the front. So
Right.
there was a bit of a double standard for Tommy, but that's okay.
I hid in the back amongst the 6'10" boy from Sudan, which was a very good decision on my part. Going through this, we both can talk about this, but we did a lot of teaching at the school, not just work with the nonprofit organization, helping them, trying to help with their fundraising efforts, organizing the whole program in general. But one of our favorite parts, I think I speak for the entire group, was teaching and working with the students.
This is class 4. They were my particular favorites. I had a lot of time to spend with them. We worked on creative arts, writing, Christian religious education, and any other class that the teacher felt like I was capable of teaching.
We were all asked to teach Kiswahili before. Once or twice we said something. I think we said thank you or hello in Swahili, and then they told us, oh, you're teaching Swahili tomorrow. All I knew how to say, and all we all had to say was thank you and hello. So that was an interesting class. Again, that's grade 4.
Well, one story that I had with class 4 was that I was asked to teach life skills, and I said, oh, well, they know how to do many more practical life skill things than I do. They know how to take care of the farm. They know how the animals need to be treated and how to go about living a life without somebody constantly providing for them. But they had never been asked what they wanted to do with their life or what their dream was or what they hoped to pursue. And so one day we used the blackboard, and I don't think they were really used to having their ideas on the blackboard, which I always was used to in grammar school. You're always asked for your opinion or your story, and your idea would make it on the board with everyone else's. Nobody would feel left out. But we went through their careers and we brainstormed what they needed to do to get to that point. What did Stephen need to do to become a pilot? What did Andrew need to do to become a driver? And they just seemed so much more enthusiastic after that class, and it was so surprising for me to see what a small act could do. And then I have drum lessons here with Eunice, so she was teaching me.
It was one of the best parts, I think, about the whole trip was that I went thinking and hoping that I would be teaching, and I also came back realizing that I was taught more than I ever taught them. I was taught how to deal with issues, the importance of faith, the importance of hope, and the importance of perseverance. I'll share a couple of quick stories with you guys later on, but just going through, this is Brother Dominic. It was an artist before, and he taught art classes with the grade 4. They loved him. They loved his art and his teaching. They all, again, like Katie said, when they found something new and they found something that they were passionate about, they really latched onto it and they gave it everything they possibly could. They would come in, they would drag you after, say, I need to ask you more questions. I want to do this better. Which was just really inspiring to see because I'll drag myself around campus sometimes complaining about my work. Trying to realize and get back into touch with that almost childlike enthusiasm and enthusiasm for the opportunity to do these things. A lot of my time was spent after about 2 weeks, I started to spend a lot of time with the older boys, which was something that was a big leap of faith for me. I had worked with younger students before, and I had done leadership positions on campus with faith-sharing groups and all these other things. But working with upper school boys, the high school boys, was something that was a bit of a challenge. These boys were anywhere from normal high school starting age to 21 to 22 years old. Not always by their own fault either. It wasn't because they were doing a bad job in school, they just didn't care. One of the boys I got to know best was actually, as I said, I hid behind him in Mass when I would fall asleep, was from the Sudan. He spent the first 15 years of his life moving from village to village with his parents, escaping persecution in Sudan. He said there's persecution of Christians and just in general, of a lot of different people. And he spent most of his time moving village to village trying to escape this persecution. He was never able to practice his faith while he was living in Sudan. He said there were moments in his life where he was able to go to church. Him and his family found a safe village, or there was a time where everything, the conflict in Sudan kind of subsided for a little bit, and he was able to practice. He was able to go to church. He was able to receive communion. And then he said inevitably a couple of weeks later, a couple of months later, people would come in again, tear everything apart. And they said the first thing people would do would be to turn the church into a prison and to torture people there. So that people associated Christianity and Catholicism with torture and death. He said that's something that he has struggled with, that he still does sometimes. And being at the school for him, having daily Mass every morning at 6:30, when he first came, was a shock, being able to practice. And he's still, almost struggling to kind of come to grips with it. But his perseverance through it all to still learn. He was a very, very bright kid. He was brilliant in mathematics. They had a math competition. He scored, I think, 8th or 9th out of about 400 students within the district. But he told me there were multiple times when he'd be moving from school to school, trying to escape persecution. He refused to learn Arabic because he was afraid that if he did, he'd be forced to convert and all these other things. So he bounced around from school to school, didn't always do well in them. And he said there were multiple times, about 2 or 3 times, where I told myself, all right, if this isn't my last school, I'm becoming a farmer. I'm just building a hut, and I'm raising animals. But he kept bouncing back, and he kept moving himself on. This is Kevin with a bunch of some of the boys from the school.
A lot of these pictures were taken near the end of our time there because the students started to realize that we would be leaving, and they wanted to make sure that we would remember them in some way.
This is the boys' soccer team. Soccer in Africa, football is very, very popular, and they are very, very good. I have the scars on my leg to show it. I eventually mustered up the courage to play with the upper school boys. One of the younger boys on my first day, we were watching them practice and warm up, and they looked scary out there. Most of them with short shirts on, and one of the kids looked at me and says, "Don't play with them; they'll break your legs." So it took me a couple of weeks to get the courage to play with them. But they were really a great group of guys, and the first chance they saw that I can teach this kid something, I can teach him something, they immediately wanted to share that something that they had that I definitely did not have, a skill that I definitely did not have. Hopefully developed a little bit while I was there.
I, on the other hand, stuck to playing with the primary school girls who were about half my size.
As we worked with these students, we really got to know them, and learning from their stories and just interacting with them was just a really, really great opportunity for us to learn the joy of life. A lot of these students don't have anything. They might not even have families, but they have each other. They have the students at the school, and for some reason or other, even the ones who have the worst situations or had the worst situations were the ones who are the happiest, are the ones who came to us every day and would always ask us how we were doing or try to drag us off to something, to show us something, to teach us something. They're the ones with the most enthusiasm. And that really just taught us to not just to value our lives, but to value every moment we have, to share it with one another.
It also shed light on the fact that Father Tom's Kids wasn't merely a sponsorship organization. It wasn't merely a nonprofit that needed development, that needed a brochure, that needed a website, all of which we did do. But it served as a family to these students who didn't have families. Father Martin, who is the director of Father Tom's Kids, was the closest thing that any of these children had to a father, a caring, positive role model in their life. So I think that was definitely something that I learned that helped me gain perspective on the role of Father Tom's Kids in the students' lives.
Yeah, every day we spent with them, like Katie said, we learned something new. And I can't stress this enough. This is something that I actually did say in my application, that I wanted to learn something. And I had no idea that I would learn this much from these students. All of them showing us so much love and so much care, and wanting to teach us just as much as we taught them. Every talk we gave to them, we led a retreat at the end of the year, which we had an awesome experience with. Talking to some of the boys about, like Nathan said, those problems in life, those things that you ask questions about. Does God exist was actually a question that came up. All these things that they so much wanted to share with us, and that some of us for the first time were faced with these questions. Something that it's so easy for us in our lives here, that's so comfortable to kind of ignore.
But we should also mention that Father Chris Saliga, who is in this picture, was an excellent organizer of our time here. He brought great schedule to the day and really did give us a structure in which we could be productive with our time, which I think may have been lacking prior to his arrival in Kisumu, which definitely made our time useful and productive.
We woke up at 5, like I said, woke up at 5:30 in the morning, got out the door as soon as the guard dogs, the hounds from hell, were put away. And then we got back once the sun went down, we were back in the house, and the dogs were back out, and went back to sleep and woke up again early the next morning. So having that structure, like he said, was great. Something I wanted to talk about a lot was the Dominican connection of the school. Learning about Dominicans outside of the Providence College campus. My only interaction, God bless you, with the Dominicans was at Providence College. For me, I couldn't really picture these men and habits anywhere else besides here. I thought, well, what else could they do? How could they possibly be in Africa? Going on this trip really opened my eyes to not just Dominicans of what they do outside of Providence College, but the Catholic Church outside of just the Western world. Such a different culture, how they deal with these things, how they deal with the different cultural aspects. And I wish we would be able to see the video. It was a video of a procession at the beginning of a Sunday Mass where there was singing in Swahili. Actually, it's a liturgical dance. Katie will laugh at me to know this, but I'm one of the people that can be a bit more, I grew up with an Irish father who's kind of like, I don't like music at Mass, not even music at Mass. If you can just get this over with, maybe 2 hymns at the beginning and at the end. But learning to actually value the beauty of a culture within the Catholic Church, to see the differences and nuances, but also the similarities. As I said, one of the biggest, coolest things for me is that 6:30 Mass in the morning. Going early in the morning, getting in before the sun rises, and the sun rises just around the time we were processing up for communion. But when I came back to Providence, I was at my first 10:30 Mass, the first weekend I was back, and I was sitting at Mass watching everybody go up for communion. And I thought to myself, well, there's a 7-hour time difference between Providence and Kisumu, Kenya. It's about 11:30 right now. 10:30 Mass runs a little bit longer. And I thought of all my brothers and sisters in Christ and all the students at Our Lady of Grace School filing into Mass, putting away their rosaries and getting ready for Mass. And it really brought, for me, that connection that the Eucharist brings between all Catholics, between all believers, that we are one in the Eucharist. It's something that I was always told through CCD, through college here, my beginning years and foundations of theology and DWC. But it's something that I struggled to actually grasp without experiencing it. And experiencing it at the school and with the aid with the Dominicans, Mass was so similar but so different. Having that connection was something that was huge for me. To just understand, to sit at Mass and not just see a huge line of people going up, but to see a community, to see people within the same faith, and to know that we are connected and at the same time celebrating the same Mass as people halfway across the world. Was something that was just absolutely beautiful, at least for me, that struck me. The Dominicans, Father Rob, Father Rob here, Father Martin in Kenya, and Father Chris in Kenya, just the support that they gave us, and then living out the Dominican truth, living out the Dominican values, truth, veritas, always searching, giving these students personal value, so that the students knew what their value was. A lot of these students didn't know that they had value, that their lives actually mattered, that even if they went back into the village and lived in the village doing odd jobs the rest of their lives, that they were people of value. And as much as we would hope that the Dominicans and that this school would be this launching pad for them to go to university and lead successful lives, Father Martin said something to us, and he said, that's a little bit unrealistic. What we want is for these people, for these students, these children, to lead lives of Christ and to know that they have personal value, so that when they're out in the village, which in all likelihood will be the case when they go back, that they will know that not just God loves them, but that they're a person, and that they are not entitled to, they have personal value. Something else.
This was one of the outings that Maria, who is all the way to the right, she is the administrator of Father Tom's Kids. So she was great at organizing cultural immersion trips for us on the weekends. So this was one of them on Lake Victoria, and one of the secondary school teachers, her name was Beryl, accompanied us to. That's Father Martin, who is the director of Father Tom's Kids, with Maria, who is the administrator.
And Father Chris with 3 students. These 3 students, I actually wrote an article about them. I think it got into the Dominican Daily. I'm not positive. I was told it was going to. But about these 3 students who actually were the top of their classes, what they wanted to do with their lives. And, you know, listening to their stories was huge. It was really inspiring, again, what they had gone through, but what they wanted to accomplish. Father Chris spent time. The school is not technically a Dominican school, but it's run with the Dominican chaplaincy. The Dominicans are a presence at the school. Father Chris, as much as he can, is there dealing with the everyday things, everyday issues as much at every school, disciplinary, all that kind of stuff. A lot of disciplinary, though.
This was actually taken at the home of the School Sisters of the Notre Dame, and we were able to spend time with different religious communities in the Casumo area. They were all very excited to have visitors, and so this was after a meal we shared with them. This was on 4th of July with the whole religious community of Casumo, and mostly, actually in this picture, all Americans. So we were singing the national anthem at that point.
And it was one of the most, I think it was a 4th of July that I'll always remember because I spent it with Canadians, people from Ghana, Algeria, mostly from Kenya, but all around the world. And it was, you know, all of them coming together, wanting us to celebrate our national independence. That was something that they planned for us, which was just incredible, and again, showed their love and welcoming hospitality was something that was huge in Kenya. And this is our group, Kevin, myself, Katie, and we had one other student who was with us from Dartmouth. She came around the same time. Her name was Anna. She was also a great help and a great resource while we were there.
So I'll just quickly go over the safari. There are pictures up here. There's an entire photo album of pictures. The safari was an incredible experience. I have recommended it to every person that I've spoken to since I've been home. It's really just like The Lion King. That's the best cultural reference I would have for it. I went to The Lion King 3D yesterday and felt like I was back in Kenya. The sounds, the idea, the story. But it was just a wonderful way to end this trip of a lifetime, to appreciate the beauty of God's creation, and to get another perspective on Kenya, experiencing it with Europeans and Americans who hadn't otherwise experienced Kenya, so we felt much more culturally immersed than some of the people we were at camp with. But it helped us gain yet another perspective on the relationship between, you know, the developed world and Kenya in this case. And we were lucky enough, blessed, I think, to see the Big Five, which includes the elephant, the lion, the black rhino, which is extremely rare and endangered, the leopard, which we saw on the last day with the black rhino, and the Cape buffalo, which are kind of ugly and not really that rare, but I guess they're important.
And as we learned with many of the animals, they weren't very intelligent either. Them and the wildebeest. Our guide was an incredible person. He was a Maasai, and we kind of completed our whole tribal experience. Also, we met Kikuyu on Mount Kenya. Our guide was a Kikuyu. Most of the people, most of the students that we worked with in Kisumu area were Luo, and on the safari, we met the Maasai, who were the famed tribe, but one of the smallest ones, actually. The biggest populations of the Kikuyu and the Luo. One of the big missions of the Dominicans there was to have these two tribes, the Kikuyu and the Luo, who usually are warring tribes. They're the ones who cause most of the political problems when they get angry with one another. One of their big things is to teach them and the students, starting with the young students, to live together and to take pride in their tribal heritage, but not to let it grow in between them, to be a schism between them. And that's pretty much it.
And we have the brochures for the sponsorship organization, pictures, so you're more than welcome to come up here and take a closer look at those.
I'm very grateful to Tommy and Katie for sharing some of their experience in Kenya, and to Nathan and TJ in their own presentations. I would say we'd take questions and answers, but it's already 8:25. So if you want to talk to the students, you could do it privately. We will have the information session for the 2012 Smith Fellowship Program next Tuesday evening, the 4th of October. We'll do it at 5:30 p.m., and there'll be a light supper served. So anyone interested in a fellowship next summer is invited to come. Again, everything, all the pertinent information is really on the website. Again, providence.edu, go to Catholic and Dominican, drop down a bit, you'll find the Smith Fellowship programs. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. Good night.